This is Political Psychology, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. In this lesson, we'll be dealing with the role of stories in storytelling and politics. That means that we have to understand humans as the storytelling animal. Our organization will look at, first of all, stories, what they're made of, how they matter. And this will lead us to the idea of empathy and how empathy allows for us to understand our fellow humans and makes us better political creatures. And finally, we're going to focus on political stories. Everyone has their stories. They are how we make sense of ourselves and the world around us. And our personal stories are constantly evolving and changing as our world changes. In addition, these stories often intertwine with the stories of those around us, our friends and family, our society, our beliefs, and, as can be expected, our political systems. Now, my story is one that might or might not be illustrative. When I grew up, I was like many good Protestants, raised in the Bible. I read it at home, church, and at my Christian schools. And the King James Version of the Bible was my storybook. However, this turned out to be a problem. Because when I moved from Minnesota to Florida and went to a fundamentalist school, the approaches to the Bible and telling stories about the Bible were different. It soon became apparent that the individuals in power in the school that I went to were cherry-picking their verses to tell stories that served their personal interests. They did this by decontextualizing the stories told, removing the larger background stories to make their own stories, which aligned with their self-interest, make sense to us and to themselves. This proved to be a major problem, especially as I got older and progressively more rebellious, as we all do. But how I rebelled was also influenced by the other books I read. Robert Heinlein's science fiction, including Starship Troopers and Tunnel in the Sky, had a major influence on my perception of what citizenship is about. And it still does have an effect on it. And when I was 18 years old, reading Dune had an incredibly large impact on what I still focus on today. The influence of that book and understanding the context of political behavior, nonverbal cues, and how religion has an impact on what politics does still resonates with me. As we know, reading books isn't just about enjoyment and escape. It's also about putting yourself into someone else's position and thinking about how you would react. This makes us more human through the empathy, and it makes us more strategic and political. Every country has its stories to connect its population together. While the reality is often complex, we start with simple stories. For instance, first graders have their American symbols, such as the Statue of Liberty, the White House, the Liberty Bell, the bald eagle, and, of course, the American flag. And we expect that by the time students graduate from high school, they will know more than just these symbols. They will also be able to know enough about the U.S. Constitution to pass the citizenship exam. But getting from one place to another is the challenge. And it's one that starts with appreciation for the major symbol of America, the Pledge of Allegiance. When I was growing up, I recited the Pledge of Allegiance every morning at the start of school with my fellow classmates. It was rote repetition so that pretty much everyone knows it by heart. But there is more to the pledge than just what we remember, just what we recite. The Pledge of Allegiance was written in August 1892, so not that long ago, and it was done by a socialist minister, Francis Bellamy. Originally, the pledge was, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." Now, things changed over the years. In 1923, the words, "the flag of the United States of America," was added. In 1954, in response to the communist threat of the times, President Dwight D. Eisenhower encouraged Congress to add the words, "under God," creating the 31-word pledge we say today. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, these are simple changes, but what they did is they enshrined the idea that the United States is a Christian nation as opposed to one that has freedom of religion. Also, just by using the word under God, it establishes an authoritarian hierarchy as opposed to different interpretations of God as flowing through us and with us. So even subtle word changes in 2 words, you can change the influence and how people interpret these very important concepts immensely. With that said, empathy matters. Bellamy and Eisenhower were dealing with distinctly different problems. Bellamy saw the need for the country to come together, while Eisenhower saw an existential threat to the United States from an aggressively atheistic Russian Empire, the USSR. All great political figures have developed mythological stories about themselves so that their followers can empathize with them. Recent examples include John F. Kennedy's World War II experience on PT Boat 109 and his courage when it sank. Lyndon Baines Johnson's self-made man stories, which were largely fictional. And George W. Bush's emphasizing his rural Texas roots, despite his being born into a northeastern elite family. Part of President Bush's storytelling involved buying his Crawford Ranch just before running for the presidency in 1999. This allowed him to be shown doing chores and just relaxing in an Old West manner. It is no surprise that he sold the ranch in 2008 immediately after his second term ended, and he moved back to Dallas. More recently, Barack Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, was his major means of telling his American dream experience to the American public. And of course, Donald Trump established his businessman persona largely through his book, The Art of the Deal. The multitude of books and media appearances that followed, including his reality television show, The Apprentice, provided him the opportunity to tell and sell his story. All of these politicians knew how to tell a story that resonated with the public and built and strengthened connections to their followers by increasingly modern means. As a result, I most often ask my students to do one major thing as they prepare for law school, graduate school, and just the work world beyond. Tell me stories about yourself. At the heart of all these stories is the concept of the theory of mind, that others have beliefs, desires, and intentions that are different from one's own. And with this knowledge that there is a difference comes an appreciation for empathy so that connections can be built. Empathy is at the heart of this concept. Sympathy is something that we've dealt with quite often. It comes from Greek syn, which means together, and pathos, feeling. It's a perception, understanding, and reaction to the distress or need of another life form, but it's not something that's fully lived, like empathy, which is from the Greek word em, which is in, and pathos, feeling, which is an understanding of another's experience by imagining oneself in that other person's situation. So at the heart of this is the theory of mind. You have a cognitive theory of mind, which is the inference and representation of others' beliefs and intentions, and then the affective theory of mind, which is the ability to detect and understand others' emotions. When we consider empathy in literature, we see that there are multiple different approaches to this that have given information and insights to individuals through the years. With the first quote here, "Know thyself, know thy enemies, 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories," from Sun Tzu and his The Art of War, it's a classic military advice from over 2 millennia ago. Now the second is an elaboration on a belief structure that was from Leviticus 19:18 that was in-group focused and arguably led to the expansion of an organizational social structure throughout the Roman Empire that continues to influence politics to this day. When Jesus of Nazareth said, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy," But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. He turned the cards. And finally, with a third, we see from a science fiction novel's lead character discussing how to overcome his enemies in the near future as it deals with external threats. In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way that they love themselves. And then, in that very moment, when I love them, I destroy them. In all these cases, empathy is used to understand behavior, whether it's human or otherwise. Ultimately, it helps us become better individuals and better political players. A major thing to consider with empathy is that we feel what others feel. Not only are parts of our brain activated in a similar manner to what others are experiencing, our body's physiology might respond as well. Here we see heat maps of feelings and what we might feel if we more completely empathize with another person's feelings. So it is not just feelings, nothing more than feelings. It is a distinct physiological response that we experience directly and which influences our decisions. Ultimately, politics is about stories. Stories of where we come from, who we are now, and where we're going as a nation and groups. Leadership ultimately requires followers telling stories. And leaders don't exist until there are followers. At the same time, followers often don't exist as a group until they have someone or something to identify themselves by. As a result, leaders have to tell the stories that people want to hear about themselves. But ultimately, it's the followers that matter. Bertolt Brecht's Fragen eines lesenden Arbeiters, or questions for a worker that reads, brings this point home rather eloquently. Who built Thebes of the Seven Gates? In the books, you will read the names of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him? Ultimately, it's the followers that matter, but it's the leaders who tell the stories that resonate. So political empathy means developing stories and telling those stories. So there are 4 principles of leadership according to Haslam, Riker, and Plato in their book, The New Psychology of Leadership, Identity, Influence, and Power. These principles are: leaders must be seen as one of us. Leaders must be seen to do it for us. Leaders must craft a sense of us, and leaders must make us matter. So, at the same time that there is one of us, or the people, there must be outsiders to combine against, which is what this cartoon is about. Becoming a leader often means becoming more empathetic than any potential other leader. In other words, being a more authentic member of the group than any alternative that is available. Show any emotions other than anger, threat, and happiness, reassurance. Sometimes sadness is a part of the job. Now, ultimately, politics is the battle over identity. And identity is about the best story. The story that brings the most people in and connects them together